it should be going live now. Just make sure that I can be heard. Can someone confirm that they can hear me in the messages, whether or not I can be heard? Oh, I'm actually hearing my own echo, so I assume that I can. I assume you can hear me now. Okay, let's move. I'm just going to tilt this a little bit down, see the board a bit better. All right, hopefully the board is visible too. All right, I'm going to take that as a yes, that I'm audible. All right. So this was the plan of action. First of all, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. This is the plan of action based on the poll. I'm going to first go over the questions on the sequential game and the idea of subgame perfect, Nash equilibrium. And then I'm going to cover the other things as I mentioned on the announcement board. So let me get right into it. So I'm going to be looking at question 8 from, the ordering might change, but it's the question that looks like this from the online formative assessment. Okay, I printed that. I gave you a PDF printout, including all the suggested answers to the final online formative assessment. So it says, in reference to the game depicted above, which of the following statements are correct? Now let me go through the laborious process of drawing this game on the board. Okay, but I think it'll be helpful. So we have a sequential game going from left to right, just for space reasons rather than up to down. So we're depicted in a game tree format. So player A has the first move. A can either go north or south. So we'll call that first move N1, S1. If player A goes north, chooses to go north, then the game will actually end there and payoffs will be 4 and 4. Okay, we're going to state the payoff of the first moving player first. So if you look at the diagram here, you see I'm not going to do it on the board. It would take too long, but I drew the first payoff in red or orange actually to be consistent, and I labeled the player A in orange. Okay, if player A goes south, then player B has a choice of whether to go north or south. Right, and we'll call this little. I'll call the second players in lowercase. So we have little n2 or little s2. By the way, I believe these payoffs I used just assign them randomly. All right, so if A goes south and B also goes south, then that's where the game ends, and we'll get payoffs of 10 and 13. Which payoff is to which is to A and which is to B? Well, I will follow the convention of the players who has the move in the player who has the first move. I will always state his or her payoffs first. Okay, but I also said this. Okay, at each end node, I wrote each end node. Sorry, that was a typo there. At each end node, we call this an end node, N-O-D-E. A's payoff is depicted, A, the first moving player, followed by B's payoffs, B. Okay. Okay, I'm going to draw the rest of this. All right, so the game might end here, or if B chooses N2, then A has the move. And then if A chooses S3, then we see B has the move. I'm going to draw out the whole thing just quickly here because I think you get the point of it. So I'm labeling moves. So this was A's choice, then B's choice, then A's choice, then here, wait, let me say this right, S1, N2, sorry, I went off a little bit there, A's choice of N3, that would end the game there, 2-6, B's choice here, this is B's second possible place where he might have the move. So B here could go north. I'm calling this N4 or south S4. Here's an end node, 19 and 20. What else do we say? N3 ended it. Little N4 leads to A's possible third choice. We call this A's possible third decision node. A could then go north N5. Payoffs are 8 and 2. Or A could go south. We'll call that S5 to label this action S5, which would then lead to another choice by B, another decision node for B. And this would be B, we'll call this B can either go south, we'll call it S6, or north, we'll call that N6. And here the payoffs will be 9 and 13, or 19, and if he goes down, 19 and 19. Okay, so it's kind of a pain to draw. Now we have the same thing that you saw on your screen. Okay, so I say let A1, comma, A2, comma, A3, semicolon, B1, little, comma, B2, comma, B3, and curly brackets. Refer to the strategy profile of players A and B, where A1, A2, and A3 refer to A's actions at each of her decision nodes in sequential order. In other words, suppose I could put something in here. I could say, all right, A, at your first decision mode, you choose S1. If at your second decision node, if you make it there, I want you to choose N3. Okay, and if you make it to your third decision node, I want you to choose N5. So then I could specify that. I could say S1, N3, comma, N5, and that would be a strategy, a complete contingent strategy for player A, for the first moving player. Okay, in other words, at any decision node she might find herself at, it would tell her what to do. So it's complete for every possible contingency. Okay, and I could do the same for the second player, for player B. I could say, okay, B, at your first decision node, I want you to, this is just an example. At your first decision node, I want you to play N2. At your this is B's first decision node. If you make it to your second decision node, I want you to play S4. And if you were to make it to your third decision node, I want you to play, let's say, N6. Okay, this is just an example. Okay, so these are specifying a profile that is pairing complete contingent strategies for the player A and for player B. Okay, so now we have the notation and we have the game. So we have players, we have actions, we have the sequence, and we have the payoffs for any combination. Okay, now what is the question asking us? It's a multiple choice question. Okay, select one. The unique subgame perfect Nash equilibrium strategy profile is S1, S3, S5, N2, S4, S6, which specifies complete contingent plans. So I know that only one of these answers is going to be correct. And for an answer to be correct, every part of that answer needs to be correct. So the unique subgame perfect Nash equilibrium strategy profile. So this has to be a Nash equilibrium strategy profile. It has to be subgame perfect, and it has to be the unique subgame perfect Nash equilibrium strategy profile for this answer to be correct. And furthermore, it has to be specifying complete contingent plans. Well, let's try that. Okay, so let's try out the possibility of S1, comma, S3, comma, S5, semicolon, N2, comma, S4, comma, S6. Okay. Now, what is going to make this a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium? It has to be a Nash equilibrium, which basically means players best responding in every possible subgame In fact, even those what we'll call sub-games that would be ruled out by the previous play, or by this, what the strategy predicts, sorry, by some other part of the strategy. Okay, so how many sub-games there are here? Well, there's quite a lot. This is a sub-game, so I could circle this, the sub-game beginning. This sub-game is a game beginning at a player's decision node and going all the way to basically the end. So here's one sub-game, here's another sub-game. I'm not going to circle them all because it'll be a mess. Here's another sub-game, here's another sub-game, here's another sub-game, and the complete game is also a sub-game. Okay? So it has to be that players are best responding in every sub-game they would find themselves at. Okay, so let's look at what this strategy prescribes. So this strategy that we specified says that that A should choose S1 here, should choose, if A finds herself here, should choose S3. If she finds herself here, she should choose S5. Okay, so she's always going south. Okay. And what should player B do? Well, if player B finds himself here, he should go north. At least that's what this strategy is telling him to do. I'm not saying yet it's a best response. That's what we have to check. He should go north. If he finds himself here, he should go south. And if he finds himself here, he should also go south. Okay. So is this, first of all, does this specify a complete contingent plan? Well, yes, it does. And you see, in every possible place where a player has the move, this is telling him or her what to do. So A has the move here. Does it tell her what to do? Yes. A has the move here. Does it tell her what to do? Yes. A has the move here. Does it tell her what to do? Yes. B could have the move here. Does it tell him what to do? Yes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, are these all best responses? In other words, given that player one, or that A, I should say, is playing these strategies, is playing the strategy that specifies these actions, is B playing these strategies the best B can do, and vice versa. Okay, and so that's the condition for Nash equilibrium. But for subgame perfection, we need to rule out incredible threats. Incredible threats. So it also needs to be that at every point that the person finds themselves, given what the other person's strategy is going to prescribe them to do, basically going forward, that individual has to be, my strategy has to be telling me to do the thing that will maximize my payoffs. Okay. So I could look at this backwards. And in fact, in other words, the way to come up with a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium in a sequential game is use backward induction, find best responses everywhere, and then write down the complete contingent strategies of each player that leads to the best responses. Okay, so let's do the backward induction and see if it's consistent with what this has prescribed. So let's go to the final possible round. The last possible decision node. The last possible decision node is here. B's last decision node. He can either go N6 or S6. Well, that's simple. He has simply one of these will be the best response. It's not going to be contingent on the other strategy at this point. Okay, so if he chooses N6, he will get, remember, he gets the second path, he would get 13. If he chooses south or S6, as suggested by the strategy, he gains 19. 19 being greater than 13, in fact, this is the best move at this point. Okay, now let's go back a little more. Suppose A has the move here. Suppose we make it over to here. Okay, so what is A given? Remember, always think, given what B's strategy is, in other words, given we know that B is going to choose to go south here, what is A's best move here? Well, the strategy says she should go south. If she goes south, B's best response tells him to also go south, and she will gain 19. If she went north, remember, she gets the first payoff, she would get 8. 19 being greater than 8, this is, in fact, her best action, or her payoff maximizing action, her best response there. Okay, so far, so good. So basically, I'm doing backwards induction. I'm underlining best responses, okay? So then I go over to here. All right, what if B finds himself at this node? Well, we've already decided what would happen if he chooses to go north, if he chooses N4, right? What's going to happen, given the strategies prescribed, which we have also set our best responses, given if he goes north, then A will have the move. Her strategy prescribes her to go south, and then B will have the move again. His strategy will prescribe him to also go south. He will get a payoff of 19. Okay, remember his payoff is the second payoff, so he would get this payoff of 19. On the other hand, if he goes south, the game ends and he would get a payoff of 20. Therefore, his best response would be S4, okay? Or to go south if he finds himself here. So far, everything has checked off according to this strategy. I mean, I could have just come up with the best responses or the backward induction, found the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, and compared it with what I see here. Okay, so let me continue. If A has the move here, she's going to compare. If she goes north, she gets 2. If she goes south, B will respond by going south. She will get 19. South is better. What if B finds he has the move here? If he goes south, he gets 13. If he goes north, A responds by going south, B responds by going south, he gets 20. So he's better off going north, given the strategy of the other player, given the rest of what the strategy is prescribing. Okay, finally, we're at the first decision node A, or the first decision node A. Or the first decision node here, where A's first choice, if she goes north, she gains 4. If she goes south, we know we're going to end up, she's going to gain 20. So she's better off going south. All right, so then again, this is what it said here. We could go, and then we go back and say, all right, what does this tell A to do at each of her decision nodes? Go south here, S1, go south here, S3, and go south here, S5. What does it tell B to do? It tells B to go, if he finds himself here, to go north here, N2, to go north here, to go south here, S4, and finally to go south here, S6. Okay, so we have our answer, and it took a long time, but perhaps it was worth it. The unique subgame perfect Nash equilibrium strategy profile is S1, S3, S5, semicolon N2, S4, S6, which specifies complete contingent plans. We specified a plan for each player, what they should do no matter where they find themselves. Okay, let's just look at the other answers quickly. Okay, what's the difference? Okay, before I continue, does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, so why are these other answers not correct? Well, either they are not giving subgame perfect Nash equilibrium strategy profiles, or they're not specifying complete contingent plans. But by the way, in games like this, unless there's ties between payoffs, players will always have best responses at each decision node, which means that previous players can anticipate that. Therefore, if we find a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, pairing of strategies leading to a single outcome, here it, by the way, here it led to the outcome S1, N2, S3, S4, and it led to payoffs 19 and 20. If we find that, it will be unique. As long as there's no ties, there'll always be a unique backwards induction path. Okay, so B. What about if the B is the same as the above, except it says S1, S3, S5, so far the same, semicolon, S2, and 4, close bracket. Okay. So here it's prescribing something different. Okay. And if this N2 is the best response, then at this point, basically you could look at it, then S2 could not also be the best response. So this one is not a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. Okay, but let's look at one other answer before we move on to the next question. What about, I guess on my printout at least, it's choice D. So what about N2 S4? Okay, no, sorry, it's choice C. So what if I had written S1, comma, S3, semicolon, N2, comma, S4. All right, so this is telling A what to do here. This is prescribing a strategy for A that tells her what to do here if she finds herself here, and it tells herself what to do if she finds herself here. And for B, it's telling him what to do if he finds himself here, and it's telling him what to do if he finds himself here. And in fact, this is a slightly advanced point, but I think you'll get it. In fact, if you look at this, this is going to lead to the same pattern of actions and the same payoffs as this pairing of strategies we discussed here. Okay? But why is this not the correct answer? Because it says which specifies complete contingent plans. Okay, so this answer here, or this pairing of strategies, S1, S3, N2, comma, S4, is not giving complete contingent plans. In other words, it's not telling A what to do if, for some reason, she found herself to have the decision node here, nor telling B what to do if, for some reason, he had the decision node there. Okay? All right, so that was the more challenging part of that question. Okay, next I'm going to move on to another question, but please, if you have any, okay, yeah, and it actually states it pretty well in the given answers. Please put a comment if you have any at any point. I'm keeping my eye on it. Okay, we're about 20 minutes in. The next I wanted to do was the ultimatum games. There were two questions involving ultimatum games. Again, the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium simply mean that each player receives the best overall payout possible. No, it does not. Not 100% sure how you're defining what you're saying, how you define the best, but certainly there could be games, both sequential games and simultaneous games. There's many cases in which there's some payoff that yields greater profit or there's some outcome, there's some combination of actions that leads to greater payoffs for both players, but that combination is not a Nash equilibrium. So I mean, we'll even see this in the ultimatum. Well, okay, not the ultimatum game, but imagine that it was like, there's a game called, I think it's called the Centipede game, something like that. There's a game where the first player can put anything between 0 and 10 in a pot, and then or they can keep it. If they put it in the pot, it will be, let's say, it's kind of like a public goods, right? It will be, let's say, doubled and then shared equally among, the first player puts the money in and then it's doubled, okay? Or the first player keeps it, and the second player can then choose how much to pass back to the first player, okay? But the second player can also choose to pass back 0. So I have, let's say, $10. I have to choose how much am I going to put in to this pot. It's going to be doubled, given to the second player who could choose to pass back any amount to me. So what would maximize payoffs for both of us? Well, I should put the full 10 in, then we have 20, and then the second player should pass me back, some amount of that, right? But once the second player has the 20, they'll probably just, their best response, assuming that assuming that the second player cares only about their own monetary payoff, they're self-interested essentially. So if I were to put in 10, it would then be doubled. The second player would keep all of it. I would get none back. Realizing that the second player will pass none of it back to me, I will then put none of it in. So the only sub-game perfect Nash equilibrium there would be for me to put in 0 and keep it all. And then also, by the way, if I were to put in any, the second player's strategy would be to not pass any back. Okay? Anyways, in this particular case, it did turn out that the payoffs were at least as high for both players as any other outcome. But that did not have to happen. That just happened. That just was coincidentally the case. And you'll see other examples in sequential games where that's not the case. I hope that answers your question. It is true that the sub-game perfect Nash equilibrium in a sequential game involves basically each player is the same as the strategies that lead to the actions derived through backwards induction, where each player, given where they are making the move that maximizes their payoff. Given, for instance, here B knows that if he goes north, A is going to choose to go to south, et cetera, et cetera. So he's forward looking in that sense. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Let me move on to the next one, just in the interest of time. And if you have any follow-up questions, maybe put them on the forum. Okay, question 9. Consider a version of the ultimatum game. Okay, by the way, you're saying, oh, what is the ultimatum game? Well, I'm about to tell you, okay? So if you didn't remember what it was, you could just read the rest of this question. Consider a version of the ultimatum game in which player A makes an integer offer, 1, 2, ... 9. Okay, so what that means is they can offer 1, they can offer 2, they can offer 3, they can offer 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. Those are their only choices. They have a finite number of choices. A can make an integer offer to B. If B accepts, he or she, namely B, gets that amount of money, and A gets to keep the remainder of the 10. Okay? This is not the game I was just describing. Okay? There's nothing added to it. So in other words, and this is something that experimenters do try, quote, test in the lab. They'll say, all right, you have $10. You can offer some amount to the other person. In other words, you propose a division of the $10. If the other person rejects it, in fact, if we try this in class, if the other person rejects it, neither of you get anything. If they accept it, you guys get the proposed divisions of the $10. Okay. Which of the following is an offer that arises in a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium? I should have said Nash equilibrium here. Assuming players only care about monetary payoffs. Assuming players only care about monetary payoffs. When I said that, I meant assuming players only care about their own monetary payoffs. I think that would be naturally inferred. So the more money I get, the higher my payoff. The less money I get, the lower my payoff. Okay. So I could draw this game as sort of as a game tree. It's going to be a bit of a mess because I have 9 different choices. So I'm going to draw them vertically. So the first player goes, we'll call him A, call her A. And the first player can choose any offer, okay? Any amount to offer the second player. So there's that, or not any, but any of these 9 things. So they can offer, you can't offer 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, ... 8, and 9. Actually, that makes it look like payoffs. So I should put the labels here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or finally 9. I assume that's 9. Okay. Then the second player, after each of these, can either say accept, I'll make it lowercase, accept, or reject. Okay, it's the same after each of these. All right, let me just use little lowercase a and lowercase r to make it easier so I can write. Okay, so A has the move here, then B has the move at one of these places following the offer of A. So B can either accept or reject if B is offered 1. Either accept or reject if B is offered 2, etc., etc., etc. Accept or reject. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll just draw them all. It's not that many. 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I'm not going to draw all the responses yet. Okay. So what even would a complete contingent strategy here look like? Well, A can only be at one possible place. A only has one possible decision node. So for A, I would just have to say, how much does A offer, right? Does A offer 1? Does A offer 9? Do they offer 5? But for B, if I want to be complete, I would actually have to specify what B would choose after any possible offer. Would B choose accept or would B choose reject? Okay, and in fact, so there would in fact be 9 responses to specify there. Okay, what are the sub-games? Well, one sub-game is the game starting here, the entire game. A goes and then B chooses. Then there's 9 additional sub-games. In other words, here, after an offer of 1, after an offer of 2, ... after an offer of 9. Okay. So in other words, for it to be sub-game perfect, the strategies have to prescribe, both for A and B, but meaningfully for B, the strategies has to prescribe B to take choices that are best for her at any of these nodes, or best for him at any of these nodes. Okay, what are the payoffs? Let me just fill those out. So the payoffs are, if A offers 1 and B accepts, then A gets 10 minus 1, right? $10 minus $1. A will get $9, and we said payoffs are the same as the monetary payoffs. So we'll give A's payoff first. So then we'll get 9, and B, she's offered 1 to B, so B gets 1. B also only cares about monetary payoffs, so B gets 1. So here are the payoffs. If we have the actions, offer 1, accept. After any rejected offer, neither gets anything. So after any rejection by B, payoffs are 0, 0. All right, I'll give another example of payoffs. If A offers 9 and B accepts, then A offers 9 to B, so A keeps 1, and B gets 9. Okay, now, which of the following is an offer that arises in a subgame perfect equilibrium, assuming players only care about monetary payoffs? Well, I know there's only going to be one subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. Okay, there's no meaningful ties here. B has a unique best response after any offer. Okay, a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium has to tell me what is B's strategy, and that strategy has to be a best response after every possible offer. Okay, B only cares about monetary payoffs. Okay, after an offer of 1, if B accepts it, B gets 1. If B rejects it, B gets 0. After an offer of 2, if B accepts it, B gets 2. If B rejects it, B gets 0. In other words, after any positive offer, and in fact, all offers are positive, so after any offer, B's best response is to accept. Okay, because B only has monetary payoffs. And accepting always yields her some positive amount, also yields him some positive amount instead of 0. So in any subgame perfect Nash equilibrium specifying complete contingent strategies, we're going to have B playing accept after everything. So we'll call it A1, A2, ... A9. Or you could, if we wanted to put it in words, we just say always accept. Okay. Knowing that B will always accept, what offer would A make? Or what offer would A make to maximize her own payoffs? If B's strategy is always accept, then A's strategy, the best response to that, the strategy that will maximize A's payoff given B always accepting, is of course to offer the minimum amount she is allowed to offer 1. Okay, so the offer will be 1, and B. So A's best strategy is to offer 1, and B's best strategy is to always accept, yielding to the outcome offer 1, accept, yielding payoffs 9 for A and 1 for B. Okay, let's go back to the thing. So which of the following is an offer that arises in a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, assuming that players only care about monetary payoffs? Is it 2, 1, 5, or 4? It's 1. Okay, fine. Any questions? And then after this, so this is if player in the ultimatum game, if you can only make offers between 1 and 9, and players only care about monetary payoffs, this is the unique subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. Offer 1, always accept. Those are the paired strategies, paired complete contingent strategies. The outcomes, the actions taken are offer 1, accept, and the payoffs are 9 and 1. Okay, now if that is well understood, I'll move on to the case where actually one case where players don't just care about their monetary payoffs, they care about something else. Their payoffs are not equal to their monetary payoffs. They may have other regarding preferences, fairness preferences, social preferences, et cetera, right? And of course, fairness preferences, I care not just about how much I earn, but whether I deem the outcome to be a fair one. So for instance, perhaps if someone makes me an offer of 1 and they keep 9, I might think that's unfair and I might reject it, because keeping $1, if someone makes me an offer of $1, keeping $1 and having the other person get 9, if I see it as unfair, I might think that's worse actually than neither of us getting anything, because perhaps emotionally that unfair outcome or the unfair way it was decided is more painful to me. It's not worth the $1, let's say, to lose my pride. Okay, but let me give the specifics. We can model this in specific ways transforming from monetary payoffs to true payoffs if you tell me what it is that people care about. Okay, consider a version of the ultimatum game, same as before, in terms of the actions, players, and monetary payoffs. Okay, that's all the same. However, consider the following particular preferences. Players get 1 unit of utility, util, per pound they earn. We switch currencies, that's not important. For player A, this represents her entire utility. So what we're saying is that player A, the first mover, still only cares about how many pounds she earns. Okay. I could have also given player A fairness preferences or some other social preferences. See the text, see the notes, but the question says A only cares about money. However, player B is extremely competitive. In addition to gaining 1 unit of utility for each pound he earns, for each pound that B earns, B also loses 2 units of utility if A's payoff is greater than B's payoff and A has a positive, sorry, let me say this again. That's not what I want to say. So he's so competitive, he actually suffers if he's not ahead. Okay, so as long as A has a positive payoff, even if it's equal to B's payoff, we're saying that if A has a positive, so suppose A and B both have a monetary payoff of 5, that will be painful to B because of B's competitive instinct. It's just the assumption of the question. So that even though B is getting 5 in monetary payoff, the fact that B is not ahead is costing him 2 in psychological payoff, in real payoff. So B would then get, because he gets 5, but then loses 2 because they get the same amount, and B is not ahead, B ends up with a payoff of 3. Okay, But if they both get 0 monetary payoffs, let's just say B's utility is 0 rather than -2. Both players, as we will always assume in this module, are aware of each other's preferences. Which of the following is an offer that arises in a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium with these preferences? Remember that in considering Nash equilibrium, we can assume that players who are indifferent between rejecting an offer and accepting it will in fact accept it. This did not come up in the past question because we required that they offer at least one. Okay? So in other words, suppose that I had allowed, suppose that I had allowed you to offer 0, right, which is more standard actually when people set this up. Then in fact, the Nash equilibrium is to offer, the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium is to offer 0, which is accepted. You're going to say, what? Why would you accept 0? Well, if I reject it, I also get 0. So I'm indifferent between the two. Okay. Now, why do I choose? I've had an explanation for this. Why do we assume that the person will choose to accept the offer if they're indifferent? Well, there's 3 justifications for this. One of which is, 2 really. One of which is, okay, maybe they wouldn't accept it, but in the real world, if you offered a tiny bit more than that, they would. And so there wouldn't be any substantial difference in the prediction. And the other thing, which is a little bit more subtle, is that a player's best response, if a player is indifferent, both of the between 2 things, both of the 2 choices are both best responses. And we find an equilibrium. We will only find an equilibrium if in the let's say the Nash equilibrium is found where the person would respond to a 0 offer with accept rather than respond to a 0 offer with reject. Okay, let's just take it as face value for now. And it's also just a convention. Okay. Sorry if that digression was a digression. Carnage? Mark Carnage? I'm not sure what that means. Okay. Don't worry too much about that for your marks, if that's what you're saying. Okay, where were we? Okay, which of the following is an offer that arises in a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium with these preferences? Okay, so now these specify the monetary payoffs, but they do not specify the true payoffs, the things that people will actually care about. I could specify those. Let's try it. Okay. So I could think about we could think about specifying utility functions. This is what we did when we looked at it in terms of behavioral economics. We can say utility. We can think of, let's think of player A's utility as a function of A's payoffs. Let's call it, profit for A, and B's payoffs, profit. Now, let me just make it more consistent with what we said before. Let's call it A's payoffs. A earns the amount YA, B earns the amount YB. We said all A cares about is her own earnings. B's payoffs, as a function of, let's say, how much player A earns and player B earns, is equal to, yes, she cares about her own monetary payoffs, but we have to subtract 2. Okay, so it's equal to YB minus 2 if YA is equal to what? If B is not strictly ahead, okay? So if YB is less than or equal to YA and YA is positive. Okay? So there's 3 possibilities. Or it's just equal to YB if YB is greater than YA, if B is strictly ahead, or it's equal to YB or just 0. Let me just say 0 if YA equals YB equals 0. That's just what was specified in the question. Okay, so let's look at what the payoffs are to every combination of actions. A offers 1, B accepts. Monetary payoffs, as we said before, were A gets 9, B gets 1. And in fact, A only cares about her own payoffs, so her payoffs to this outcome would still be 9. But here, B wouldn't get 1. B gets 1 in monetary payoffs because YB equals 1, but A is getting a positive amount, and B is getting less than or equal to that amount. So B would here get 1 minus 2. This is the 2 of pain that B feels when B does not strictly, let's say, quote unquote, win. So 1 minus 2 obviously is equal to negative 1. Okay? If A offers 1 and B rejects, both earn 0, both get 0 psychological payoffs. Okay, so for instance, let's think about would it be a subimperfect Nash equilibrium for A to offer 1 and for B to accept? If A were to offer 1, B find herself at this node, so in this subgame, her strategy, her best response, or her strategy prescribing the best response is to reject, not to accept, because 0 is greater than negative 1. She'd rather neither get any than she gets 1 in monetary payoffs, but A gets 9 in monetary payoffs. So, will A make an offer of 1, knowing that it will be rejected? Well, what's the strategy or action, knowing how B is going to respond, that gives A the greatest payoffs? Well, if there's any offer she can make that will be accepted, then that's better than getting 0. Okay, so probably, so if we can find an offer that's accepted, then 1 will not be then 1 will not be an offer that's part of a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. Okay, so what offer will be accepted? Which offers will be accepted? Well, if B rejects any offer, B gets 0. Both get 0 in monetary payoffs, which we said since we've said, and in the problem it said B gets a 0 psychological payoff if both get 0 monetary payoffs. So you need to make an offer that would yield B at least 0 psychological payoffs. What offer would give B at least 0 psychological payoffs? Well, so in other words, if you were to offer, so the one question I could ask is, do I need to offer B strictly more than 5? Well, I don't think so, because B only loses 2 from not having greater payoffs than A. So if B is offered 2 in monetary payoffs, then B will get 2 in monetary payoffs. It will cost her 2 in so 2 in monetary payoffs is worth 2 to her, but it costs her 2 in psychological payoffs from not being ahead. So her net psychological payoff will be 2. In other words, YB minus 2 equals 0. So let me say it a different way. So the utility that B gets from B gaining a monetary payoff of 2, A gaining a monetary payoff of 8, B gaining a monetary payoff of 2 is equal to the amount B gets, this is YB, so 2, but since this is less than this, or less than or equal to this, 2 minus 2 is equal to 0. Okay, so if A were to offer 2, let's consider this. If B accepts, A gains 10 minus 2 equals to 8. And B gains 2, but it psychologically costs him 2, so he gains 0. What if B were to reject it? Then neither would get anything monetarily, and both would get 0 psychological payoffs as assumed in the question. So B would then be indifferent between accepting and rejecting the offer. Accepting would be one of B's best responses. Okay, so we've found a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, it seems. Well, or at least that's not necessarily the case. Sorry, we found, I mean, we have, it is the case, but it's not necessarily the case. So we have an offer A could make that would be accepted, that would yield a payoff of 8, which is certainly better than offering 1 and getting 0. So then we have to think, okay, so first of all, let's look at the other, what would happen if she made the other offer. So at least this offer will be accepted. What about an offer of 3? Well, surely if an offer of 2 was accepted, an offer of 3 would, because B would, so then you'd have payoffs 7, monetary payoff 7 and 3. B would gain payoff of 3 from the monetary payoff minus 2 from not being ahead equals 1. So obviously she would accept that. Okay, and once we started with offers of 6, in fact, it turns out that utility B of monetary payoffs of A gets 4, B gets 6. Then, in fact, B would start getting a payoff of, so her monetary payoff is 6. We're stating B's payoff, monetary payoff second. And since B is actually getting more than A, we don't subtract anything. So it's just 6. Okay. But the point is that B will accept any offer of 2 or above. B's best response is going to be, so if we're to give the strategies, A's strategy is going to be to offer. In the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, A's strategy is going to be to offer 2. B's strategy, let's say I called this A1, R1, A2, R2, A3, R3, etc., A9, R9. B's complete contingent strategy would be R1, comma, A2, comma, dot, 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 always accepting anything. In other words, except if offer is greater than or equal to 2. Okay. I'll get your question in just a moment. Okay, so I just want to finish it. So it says, which of the following is an offer that arises in a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium with these preferences? The correct answer is 2, E, right? Because A's, knowing that B will accept any offer of 2 or greater, A only cares about her own monetary payoffs. So why would A offer more than 2? Right, so here she would get a payoff, here she gets a payoff of 8. If she offers 3 and it's accepted, she would get a payoff of 7, et cetera, et cetera. If she offers 9 and it's accepted, she gets a payoff of 1, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that this is why A's strategy is to offer 2. First player strategy offer 2. Okay, so that answers the question. Now let me get to your question. Why do we choose 0 psychological payoff instead of 1? Okay, I don't know what the question is asking, what your question is answering. Are you saying, so I could have come up with, I mean, in theory, in principle, you can have I can have psychological payoffs as a function of the outcomes or the play, could take any form, but I specified it specifically in this question. I specified, okay, so I can, when I specify the psychological payoffs, that's getting at what is the question asking, okay? We could have a whole different discussion about what are reasonable psychological payoffs to specify, but we haven't really covered that, okay? So I said, assume these are the payoffs. Assume these are the psychological payoffs. What will be the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium? Okay, given that, yes, Keith, you're correct. A makes the first move. He knows that B will accept anything 2 or greater, so he offers 2. Why not offer 4? Well, A cares about her own payoffs, so if she offers 4, she keeps 6. If she offers 2, she keeps 8. 8 is greater than 6. Why do we? I'm trying to still get at the previous question. Why do we choose 0 psychological payoff instead of 1? Are you talking about A's psychological payoff? I mean, you're assuming A only cares about material payoffs, which is pretty standard. A only cares about, her own material payoffs. Another question is, why did I specify it in terms of making it easy, or not easy, but reasonable to answer? Why did I specify that B loses something if she's not strictly ahead. If he is not strictly ahead, he loses 2. However, if they both get 0, then B doesn't feel bad about them both getting 0. Basically, if you look at the structure of the question, you'd find that it would not be a very interesting question if when they both got 0, B would then also lose 2 and B would get -2. So I don't know if that's answering your question. I mean, this was a little bit of a twist from the question I think that you've seen on previous exams or in the textbook. I was trying to give you a variation on it. So, you know, other possible psychological payoffs could be that B loses if he's behind, but if they're equal, he doesn't lose anything. There's no psychological loss to them being equal. Another possibility would be that B loses in proportion. B's psychological payoff is cost. B loses utility in proportion to the difference between his payoff and A's payoff, or loses based on the absolute difference. They neither like it when they could both dislike it when there's a difference in payoffs, or maybe I only dislike it when my payoffs are behind, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, moving on. Okay, it's almost an hour, but I'll have time to cover more. The only thing is it's getting dark here. I'm going to have to add some light. But let's move on to the next thing I want to do, which was, okay, Nash equilibrium in general. It's taking us perhaps to maybe a slightly easier branch of questions. Okay, so if we go back to the formative assessment, I don't know if this makes it better or worse. We'll leave it aside for now. Okay. The game of matching pennies, in which this was the first question on the formative. The even player earns £1 when both play heads or both play tails, but loses £1 when they play distinct faces, different sides of the coin. The odd player earns £1 when they play distinct faces, but loses £1 when they play the same faces. In other words, this is a zero-sum game. There's a winner and a loser. You might have played it as odds evens, same idea. One player wins the other's pound when they play the same thing. The other player wins the other person's pound when they play different things. All right, select one. Okay, so you should be able to draw this in matrix form, specify the players, the actions, and the payoffs. It should be pretty straightforward. So each can either choose heads or tails. By convention, we specify the row player's payoff first in these matrices. So let me just do so quickly, actually. So we'll have the row player could choose heads or tails. Column player could choose heads or tails. Remember, this is the column player. This is the row player. And then there's 4 possible combinations of choices. Instead of calling it the row player, I'll call it the even player, but it's in the row position. And this is the odd player. So the even player wins when they both play the same thing. So he gets 1. Odd player would then lose 1. Same here. When they play different things, the odd player wins. So the even player loses. The row player, payoff specified first, loses the 1. The odd player gets it. It's called zero sum because if we add these up in every cell, it adds to 0. Worse? I don't know. Okay. Oh, the light makes it worse. Sorry. All right, I'll keep all the light off for now. Okay. It's a reflective surface, sorry. Okay, so the question is, which of these is a true statement? There's only one, so select only one. Does this have multiple Nash equilibria? Does it have a pure strategy Nash equilibrium? Does it have no Nash equilibrium? Or does it have a mixed strategy Nash equilibrium? Well, I've told you before that basically every game that we're going to be talking about, and in fact every game in a more general sense, has at least one Nash equilibrium, and will have And two-player games will have an odd number of Nash equilibria. And basically the logic, if you could see the logic if you look at players having best response functions in pure or mixed strategies, you'll see that they'll have to intersect an odd number of times, could be at the ends, but that's an aside. Okay? You can just remember that. Okay, so what are the Nash equilibria here? Well, let's use our underlining to see if we can find any in pure strategies. Underline best responses. Even chooses heads. Well, let me underline, I don't know, this player's best responses first. If odd is choosing heads, obviously the even player wants to choose heads, so I'll underline the payoff to her best response. If odd chooses tails, even player wants them to match. He chooses tails, I'll underline the payoff to his best response. If even plays heads, odds wants them not to match, so I'll underline, she'll play tails, I'll underline her payoff. Tails, heads, underline her payoff. Okay. Is there a cell, is there a combination of strategies in which each are best responding? Or is there a combination of cells in which each are best responding to one another? The answer is no. There's no pure strategy. There's no pure strategy, combination of pure strategies where each is best responding. This is obvious. Just think about it. In competitive games, if you're a soccer striker and there's a goalie, it can't be that they're both best responding to another. One wins, the other loses. But there is a Nash equilibrium. We know there's always a Nash equilibrium. And here you can go back to the notes. It's going to involve each randomizing, each playing a mixed strategy. And in fact, in this case, it's going to be, and you know this because the payoffs are basically symmetric, and you can intuit it also if you think about it. Each of them it's going to be a Nash equilibrium if each of them plays heads with 50% probability. If each flips a coin between heads or tails. You can look at it more closely if you want to. If the other guy's randomizing, so if odd is randomizing with 50-50 probabilities, even says, okay, if I play heads, half the time I get 1, and half the time I get -1. If I play tails, half the time I get -1, half the time I get 1. Therefore, I'm indifferent. And think about it for odd too. If evens, then, so he's indifferent. So, one of my best responses is to play each half the time. For odd, if even's playing heads half the time, the same logic holds. So if odd then plays heads, then half the time odd gets -1, half the time 1. If odd plays tails, if odd plays heads, half the time -1, half the time 1. If odd plays tails, half the time 1, half the time -1. So odd would then be indifferent between playing heads or tails. So one of their best responses is to randomize 50-50. Okay, so there's a single mixed strategy Nash equilibrium. I'm not asking you to be able to compute those Nash equilibria, but I want you to understand it in the way like what I explained just here. Fuzzhead says, will exam questions get more complex than this example? I don't understand. Are you talking about this example or the previous example? Let me look. YA -3 and YB -2. I don't know why that's so much more complicated. That would just be a sort of straightforward transformation of the payoffs, or where we distinguish between psychological and monetary payoffs, and there are minimum levels of these for A and B to make an offer, accept the offer. I don't think that it will get much more complicated than what you saw. I think that was on the upper end of difficulty of examples. So, all right. Let me move on. Hope I'm still visible. I'm going to have to turn on some lights here. Thanks for the questions, by the way. All right, so what else do I want to say? All right, we got the next question. When a game has multiple equilibria, I propose methods to sort out which one would be the best. There's nothing to explain there. I mean, I don't know how to explain that more than what we had. The answer was all of the above. What I've explained in lecture, what's explained in the text. The next question, okay, right, this one's worth explaining perhaps. consider the above game. We have this enter, don't enter game. The column player has 2 strategies, enter or don't enter. The row player has 3, enter fully, partially, don't enter. Let me depict this. Simultaneous game. If I state it as a matrix, feel free to assume it's a simultaneous game. So we got, I'm just going to abbreviate here, enter, don't enter for row, sorry, for column, enter fully, enter partially, don't enter for row. Okay. Now it says, let me just give the payoffs. So if, I'll just write them down without giving you intuition for each of them. Maybe you could think about intuition for some of these. I tried to make it make sense, conform to this, the description of entering, not entering. I was thinking of firms entering a market as one possibility. Okay. Okay, I hope we're still visible. Yeah. Okay. What are we being asked for? What are the rationalizable strategies? And we're asked for 2 things. And I have to choose 2. You had to. Okay, let me just answer the question. So I need to know the rationalizable strategies, which are the strategies that are survivors of iterated strict dominance. I give you a hint there. And the Nash equilibria in pure strategies, if there are any. All right, so let's do iterated strict dominance. Okay, this also gets at something else that was being asked, which is dominance, iterated strict dominance. All right, so what I want to do is I want to find out, does any player have a strategy that's strictly dominated by some other strategy? And I'll only talk about strategies being dominated by pure strategies. I want to talk about pure strategies being dominated by pure strategies for this module. Okay, so in other words, let's look at the row player. Is there any strategy that is always worse than some other strategy? That's worse than some other strategy, no matter what the row player believes the column player is going to do. Well, let's take a look. So if she enters fully, the row player gets -2 if column enters, 5 if column does not. If she enters partially, she gets 1 if column enters, 2 if column does not. If she does not enter, she gets 0 in either case. Look at this. Looks like it's always better to enter partially than to not enter. Okay, so in other words, let me say it once again. If column enters, enter partially yields 1 instead of 0. If column doesn't enter, enter partially yields 2 instead of 0. So no matter what I believe about what column's going to do, it can't be that my optimal strategy is to not enter. Okay? If I was considering this, I should say, wait a second. If I think whatever is making me do this, this is certainly better. So, iterated strict dominance. Strict dominance, well, this don't enter, I might say don't enter, is strictly dominated by enter partially. Or I might say enter partially, sometimes we use a D to depict this, dominates don't enter. Let us cross off don't enter. But then here comes the iterated part. We have to think. If column knows that row is rational, column knows that row will never play don't enter. So now column looks at this game, this reduced, smaller version of the game. In this smaller version of the game, does column have a strategy that's dominated? Okay, so we're not saying does column have a strategy that's dominated, period. We're saying in this reduced version of a game, does column have a strategy that's dominated? This will be an iterated dominance. Well, let me look. If row plays enter fully, column is better off playing enter. If row plays enter partially, what I say, if row plays enter fully, then column is better off playing don't enter, sorry. Right, because 0 is better than -2. If row plays enter partially, then enter is better than don't enter. So neither is a dominant strategy. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to eliminate anything else here, and I could look back. I won't be able to eliminate anything else here. Okay, so let's go back to what I'm being asked. So I could, or well, let me just state what we've learned. So we've learned that rational strategies that survive iterated strict dominance are rationalizable strategies. So here, rationalizable strategies for row, enter fully and enter partially. For column, enter or enter fully, whatever it was, and don't enter. Okay, but the question's also asking us about Nash equilibrium pure strategies. Okay, one thing we know, and I think you could see this very intuitively, is a strategy that's dominated will never be part of a Nash equilibrium. It's never a best response. In fact, it's also the case that a strategy that's iterated dominated will also not be part of a Nash equilibrium. But that doesn't matter here, because we only have one thing dominated and no further iterations. So what that means is that I don't have to look at this. I can just look at my underlining best responses for this part of the game. I started doing it before. If row enters fully, column's best response is not to enter. I'm going to enter the I'm going to underline the payoff to column to that outcome. If row enters partially, column's best response is to enter, underline the payoff there. If row enters fully, now let's look at row's best responses. If column enters, row's best response is to enter partially. We found at least one Nash equilibrium. If column does not enter, row's best response is to enter fully. So we found two Nash equilibria in pure strategies. Okay, Nash equilibria include, or the Nash equilibrium pure strategies include, or are, let's specify row first, enter partially, semicolon, column, enter. And the second possibility is row enters fully, or plays the strategy enter fully, same thing. Column plays don't enter. Okay. So where are we now? Now let's just go look at what the question, and there's, by the way, remember I said that so how do you solve a problem like multiple equilibria? We have two pure strategy Nash equilibrium here. And I said there's always an odd number, so there will also be one mixed strategies, but I didn't ask you about that. Let's get to the multiple choice bit, okay? There are two Nash, okay, which is correct. There are two Nash equilibria in pure strategies. Yes, A is correct. B, enter fully and enter partially are rationalizable for row, and enter and don't enter are rationalizable for column. So B is also correct. Remember, I said choose two. What about, so we already have the right answers, but let's just check the other ones. There's only one Nash equilibrium. No, we found at least two. D, all strategies are rationalizable for either player. No, don't enter is not rationalizable for row. Finally, there are no Nash equilibrium pure strategies. Obviously not. Okay, logic of answering the question. Okay, we still got 13 of you, 13 people listening. Any questions on this one? We covered a number of concepts: Nash equilibria, dominance, rationalizability. Okay, the next, I'll give you a moment there. All right, nothing more I want to say on that. All right, now I'm gonna, I think I have light enough to do one more here. Okay, so the next thing I think the last thing I said I was going to hopefully be able to cover was the insurance problem. And this is an example of a sort of a longer answer problem. It's not a multiple choice, but actually even the multiple choice do require some computations. All right, let me see if there's anything I can do to add a bit of light in here. And maybe this one. Yeah, so that's an improvement. Okay, so now moving on to the sixth problem set, the insurance problem. Not an easy problem. Not really an easy problem. Requires some computation and explanation, if I remember. Okay. So the insurance problem. Suppose there is a 50-50 chance of a debilitating disease. Okay. We have a risk-averse individual. They have a current wealth of 20,000 pounds, but half the time they will they will suffer a debilitating disease and suffer a loss of 10,000 pounds. Okay. So I'm going to say we're probably going to be drawing some utility of income diagrams here. I could also, let me write this down. So what is their net income? Did I use one to call it net income? So, pen and blood. Oh. So let's say without insurance, we have Y equals to 20,000 with, this is my one way of notating it, half the time, and 20,000 minus 10,000, the remaining half the time. Okay, with probably one half it's 20, with probably one half it's 10. That's the uninsured. Okay, what does the question ask? It asks me to calculate the cost of actuarially fair insurance in this situation. You need to know what that means. What is actuarially fair insurance? It's insurance where the cost of the insurance is equal to the expected monetary value of the payout from the insurance. It's insurance that costs the same amount as it costs in expected value terms to the insurer. So here, okay, now, but it also says, okay, it says calculate the cost of actuarially fair insurance. All right, we'll assume that I meant actuarially fair full insurance. Okay, if I don't say anything, just assume it's full insurance. Okay, so insurance that if I suffered the loss of 10,000 would fully compensate me. So what's the cost of that? So we'll call, here we are. We say, we'll call the loss is equal to 10,000 with P equals 1/2, or 0 and 0 with the remaining probability. The expected value of this, expected cost or reimbursement, E for expected value of the loss, is equal to 1/2 times 10,000 pounds. I'll leave off the pound sign. It's equal to 5,000. Okay. Use the utility of income graph to show that the individual will prefer to buy fair insurance, to buy this insurance that costs 5,000, that pays her back her loss in the event that she has one, to accepting the gamble uninsured. In other words, to not buying the insurance. If the insurance costs 5,000, if we have actuarially fair insurance, this person will prefer to buy it. All right. So if she buys the insurance, so if she doesn't buy the insurance, so she ends up with, this is her income if she's not insured. All right, we'll call Y tilde. 20,000 half the time, 10,000 half the time. If she is insured, her income, what notation did I use? Y insured maybe, Y with insurance is equal to, well, 20,000 what she starts with. Insurance costs her 5,000. Now, half the time she'll get a loss of 10,000 and be fully reimbursed, right? And half the time she'll suffer no loss. In either case, she ends up with the 20,000 she started with minus the 5,000 the insurance cost her, or 15,000. Okay. All right. Now, we know that a risk-averse person, by definition, will not take a fair gamble. A risk-averse person, almost by definition, will prefer the expected value of a gamble to the gamble itself. They'll prefer certainty to uncertainty when the expected monetary values are the same. So that alone gives us the insight as to why they would prefer to have 15,000 for certain instead of having 10,000 or 20,000 each half the time, right? If I were to start out with giving 15,000 for certain and say, hey, do you want to place a fair bet on gaining or losing 5,000? By definition, the risk-averse person would say no. So clearly, this is worse than this. But we can also show that as coming the standard way that economists model that is that it comes from the person's diminishing marginal utility of income. So let's draw that. Okay. I drew it, I think, rather pretty cleanly in the printout here. I'm just going to draw it which I've shared with you. I'm going to draw it a bit less nicely on the board. What shall I erase? Let's just erase the whole thing. We already have our computations, and you'll also see it in your printout. Ooh, I've got some marker on this. Life will not be happy. Okay. So, utility of income. What's the diagram? What's that all about? Well, we have utility on the vertical axis and income on the horizontal axis. Okay. And the income here is in thousands of pounds, whatever. The person is risk averse. Economists also say this is utility of either income or of the gamble, or expected utility of the gamble. Oh, it's really hard to do this for a market. The economists' basically definition or way of modeling risk aversion, or thing that they argue justifies risk aversion, is that utility is increasing in income, but it's increasing at a decreasing rate, which has meaning when we're talking about choosing between gambles and certainties, or choosing between different gambles. So this would be, income, and this is utility of income. We're specifying first utility of certain income, of certain levels of income for certain. So note that it's increasing, but it's increasing at a decreasing rate. So a particular increase in income has a large impact on utility when income is small, right? Because this is steep, but a small impact on income, the same increase in income has a smaller impact on utility when income is fairly high. So in other words, trading off, you would not be willing to trade off equal income gains and losses with similar probabilities, because the gain you'd get from moving, let's say, from here to here half the time would not be enough to outweigh the loss you'd get from moving the same distance half the time, because this vertical distance is greater than this horizontal one. Okay, background. Okay. So, what does this look like? And how can we show that the person, I'm losing people like crazy. Can you still see the board? That's getting to supper time, I suppose. Okay. Tell me if you cannot still see the board. All right. So, without the income, without the insurance, the person has 20,000 half the time, 10,000 half the time. Okay. So half the time, it's not completely to scale, but it's fine. Okay. For our purposes, it's fine. 10, 20. So half, even move the 10 a little bit in this direction, it shouldn't matter for our purpose. It makes it easier to follow. So half the time, if they don't buy the insurance, they will have the utility of 10. And the remaining half of the time, remember, it's always increasing, but at a diminishing rate, they will have the utility of 20,000. I gained one back. Okay. So, on the other hand, if they buy the insurance, and now I haven't told you how much they value that at yet. So it's going to be half of this plus half of this. It's going to be halfway between here and here, which corresponds to a particular point. Okay. It corresponds to the point. If I were to draw a line between this point, this level of income, and this utility, draw a straight line. Should get a bit early. Between here and here, and then I were to go halfway between here and here in terms of the income, and then so this would be 15, and I were to project up to this diagonal line, it will give me this point, which is the expected utility of this gamble, we could call it y tilde. Remember, half the time 20, half the time 10, which is equal to half utility of 20 plus half utility of 10. On the other hand, I'm down to 9 again. On the other hand, if they get 15 for certain, well, we know what that utility is. Project up to the utility of income graph. That's up here. This over here is the utility of 15. This is obviously higher than this. We see it, quote unquote, because this point is above this same point on the diagonal. What else can I say about this? Okay. Yeah, it's all written in the notes. So, yeah, there's a justification for how it is that I know that this point, where from projecting up from halfway between here and here to this diagonal, is the same as half the distance between here and here. It's just a very geometric point. Okay, the person would purchase such a policy. Perhaps I've beaten this to death. Okay, it's better to be here than to be here half the time and here half the time, because this gain is much smaller in magnitude than this loss. All right, so I would not want to take half of this loss in order to get half of this gain. Buy the insurance. We could think about some follow-up questions that could be asked here. We gained one person back. I'll stop saying that. A follow-up question. All right, well then so yes, they'd be willing to pay 5 for the insurance. They'd be willing to buy this actuarially fair insurance. But what is the most they'd be willing to pay for the insurance? Well, let's think about it. What is the most they'd be willing to pay for fair insurance? Is a follow-up. Okay. Well, before they bought the insurance, if they cannot buy insurance, they'll end up with this utility here, halfway between here and here. I can ask myself, what is the certain income that would make them just as well off as having 20 half the time and 10 half the time? Remember, if I'm fully insured, I end up with certain income. So the question is, what is the point along the utility of income graph, this curve, that yields the same utility as half of 20, or half of the utility of 20 and half the utility of 10? Well, we see it's this point right here. Okay, so it's the same utility as having half of this and half of this. It's the same utility, but so this certainty is just as good as having this half the time and this half the time. But then I still wouldn't have fully answered the question, because the question is, how much would you be willing to pay? Well, you'd be willing to pay the difference between 20 and this point, whatever that is, in order to certainly have this point. You'd be willing to pay this amount for full insurance. And if I told you what U of Y was, then you could actually calculate it. I believe we do that you do something very similar to that, in the next part of the problem. Okay, I think I will continue this either with a live or just with a recorded video. I think it's getting rather dark and I'm losing participants. So let me continue. So basically we've answered part A. I'll answer parts B and C in another video, and please do ask me any follow-ups. Okay? And any further questions before I close the live, please? My pleasure, and have a good evening. Like I said, I will follow up with the rest of this question probably tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.